we streaming too?
Being live streamed.
All right, we're live streaming. So I'd like to call this meeting to order. We acknowledge the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. I have received one regret this evening from Director Goodwin. Other than that, looks like we have quorum and we're ready to go. Can I have a motion on the, oh, sorry, do we have any conflicts of interest to declare before this meeting? None? All right. So can I have a motion on the table that the board of directors adopt the agenda as presented? Motion by Director Bodger, seconded by Vice Chair Phillips. Would you like to speak to your motions? Any discussion on the matter? As I see none, we'll move to voting. All those in favor? All those opposed? And any abstentions? Okay, as I see none, the motion passes with the unanimous consent. So we can move onwards to Student Affairs Advisory Agreement. So I'm assuming that all of you have read the briefing note for this week. As far as I understand, what this briefing note is looking for specifically is more funding from students in order to fund some more ambitious projects. But I will let Phil take it away.
So that's not entirely accurate. Basically, what's happened is over the course of this past academic year, we've negotiated with our partners in the Graduate Students Association as well as the Department of Student Affairs with the university, which is why we've invited Dr. Ivan Joseph here to help present. Ultimately, what we've done is we've finalized an agreement, and we're looking for board endorsement to kind of approve and sign on that. That includes the increase to the funding that you alluded to, but ultimately we're looking for approval to sign the agreement.
Okay, perfect. Dr. Ivan Joseph, would you like to speak on this matter at all?
Yeah, I'm just going to share some thoughts. You know, I'm still kind of new to the student affairs portfolio here at Laurier. You folks are unique in your funding and your, I'll say, leadership and power sharing agreement with this 50-50 split. Nowhere else in Canada does it exist. So there's no precedent and benchmarks to really to say, okay, these are the best practices. I think what's happened over the course of time is the university has contracted and hit some budget constraints. That 50-50 has been unbalanced. And so there's been some, I'll say, challenges to the funding, and there's some structural deficits that exist, meaning we had some issues in teaching and learning and academic accommodations. We had some issues in academic support. We had some issues in athletics. What I noticed is that we were doing some parallel work, meaning you folks were doing the work and we were doing the work. And sometimes people were stepping on toes. Sometimes people had elbows up, and it didn't make sense. We serve the same population. We serve the same group. And so we talked about how could we do this better? What would it look like? And so we brought the students a year ago, before we even got into this agreement, just to have the conversation, and invited them into our strategic planning session to say, what are the priorities? What does it look like? How do we work better together? As that evolved and the conversation happened, we started talking about the funding challenges, the staffing challenges, the student experience gaps, the things that we needed to address. As that came out, it was also at the same time, the university was saying, Ivan, there's going to be a 5% budget cut to you, and as much as a 7%. Now, I trust that this is a confidential meeting, and so I don't want this to get out of the room. It's not. We're okay then. Well, then we looked at some significant cuts that would have significant impacts to the student experience. That would be probably cause reputational, I'll say, harm at times. But there was no other way. We had to make the cuts to make it sustainable. I won't go into those, but let's just say when we talked about it, the student union president said, listen, we can't do that. Let us take a look and say, how can we do this differently? What would it take? What would you be willing to do? And that's how we got into the conversation. I think an agreement was reached where I'm not sure if either side is really happy, but both sides are not unhappy. But I've always been told that when both sides walk away, giving up a little bit, and they're a little bit, then it's probably the best agreement. And so we've got students and student leaders in our day-to-day operations and strategic planning groups of how we run our organization. And as a result of that, we now have access to more funding. For example, academic accommodations, teaching and learning support, athletics. And we've got some things now, the big changes, things outside of student affairs, such as development, because we need to raise more money, fundraising, communication support. There's one other one that's financing and budget analysts. Usually we're outside of our agreement, but now we've come into our agreement. I will tell you that it is a challenge, even for me to convince my president and the VP finance for this, because those people usually report into those folks and they don't, again, want to let go of that power and give it to, for lack of a better word, student associations. But those are hard lines in the sands that we kind of negotiated, because we believe students have to have oversight and accountability for those pieces. That's kind of it in a nutshell. I've just gone through it quickly. I'm sure there will be questions about the increase of the fee. I know, Mohammed, you brought some of those up, and I'll speak to those a little bit if you're okay with that, Phil. When we look at it, it's a 9% increase, but I want to remind folks that 6% is inflation that's coming through, right? That 3% does represent a significant increase, but the fee, we didn't bring it beyond the average. It's the average of our peers. Our facilities they're in a state of challenge. I can't think of any place else where there have been two major facilities raised where students couldn't get access to it. Our structural deficits in teaching and learning and academic accommodations are an issue and a challenge. But part of this isn't us just raising those fees. Remember, now we're still going to enforce and put money back into the student life levy. So no referendum is coming back for that. We are having the conversations right now about intramural fees going away, about recreational fees going away, about access fees going away. That's going to be all a part of this conversation that we're having.
Director Burchard, do you have a question?
Yeah, I have a multitude of questions.
Ask away, sir.
So one of the big things, this year, and I remember even since last year when I was a director-elect, was the constant conversation that I had with the executive director about the SAAA and the negotiations. This was a topic of conversation multiple times in open and in camera discussions, making sure that we as a students union get the absolute best that we can out of the agreement. And I'm quite satisfied that we have come to, based on my own reading of the agreement and the briefing note, that we have come to a really good solution to this. My only question is now that you kind of bring it up is, so are there plans of getting rid of some of the other fees? And if so, what does that mean? Are we going to actually bring the SLL back to Waterloo?
So I can speak to that a little bit. So it's short answer is yes. The long answer is it's not quite that easy. So I don't remember back, well, let's call it a year ago. The original intention was to take the referendum, take the question back to referendum once we were back in person, which, as it turns out, last year during the election, we didn't have that opportunity. And Ivan asked me the question, he's like, well, we've got this money in this reserve. Why on earth would we go and ask for more money? And I didn't have a good answer for that question. So I started to go in through basically 5 or 6 years worth of student life levy projects on both campuses and find out what that dollar value is. And ultimately came to the average of about $800,000 of money being given away on both campuses. So through 3 student life levy committees, being Waterloo, Brantford, and then ultimately the multi-campus one, which was funded by both student life levy fees. So there is going to be a way for student affair based projects to help enhance student lives through the similar principles. It just won't be called the student life levy. Through the agreement, if I remember correctly, I believe it's going to be called the Student Experience Enhancement Fund, and it'll be completely adjudicated through that student affairs leadership group. So students will be able to bring projects forward as they have always done and continue to do on the Brantford campus. But student affairs professionals will be able to kind of make recommendations for projects that will be adjudicated by the leadership within that room.
Okay, so will we continue to have essentially the committee that we've been serving on this year, which was the oversight, where we kind of had our discussions?
So the Brantford student life levy, which is still a fee assessed to students, our goal would be to remove that But it's not as easy as just making a decision to do that, given that it passed referendum. So we're looking into what the mechanics are of kind of either pausing or removing that fee for Brantford students so that they can then just participate in the student experience enhancement fund as well. Not that they can't now anyways, it's just added resources. But we're not entirely sure what the mechanics are from a legal standpoint to be able to pause that fee. But the goal will be to mitigate that cost for Brantford students and let them kind of fully immerse themselves into this other fund.
What will be the governance structure that we have? Because I know with the Brantford SLL, governance.
So that hasn't fully been determined yet, but that we know that the board is keen, would be a way I would describe it, of being a part of that committee. And we have no problem with kind of establishing a committee that has board presence on it for sure.
Okay.
Let me just pause for a second. Those questions that you're asking, like one of the reasons why this is a 1-year agreement is we have to be in the weeds to figure out what that looks like.
Absolutely.
And then when we figure it out, then we're gonna have to probably fix it after we figure out, oh, we missed this, we missed that. So it's kind of got 2 1-year learning periods in here for us to get it right.
Cool. The last question that I have is about conflict of interest. The goal by the end of the agreement is for the students to be funding this 70, the student affairs.
Roughly speaking,
Around 75%. That's an overwhelming majority of the department. One, how will students be getting credit for this? Because the SLL gets, any projects are funded by the SLL get credit for getting funding from the SLL. That's number one. And then number two is, well, since you'll be the VP, how does that kind of work in terms of a conflict of interest? Because your funding comes overwhelmingly from the students, but then you report to the president.
Yeah. So there's 2 things I'll answer. You know, in my life as a leadership expert, we never worry about who takes credit or gets credit for serving anything. We are driven by, like, honestly, the data, right? Whether it's the NESI data or the CUS data, like our job and our goal is to make sure that the reputation of Laurier, which is number 1 in student experience, number 2 or number 3, continues to go there. Who assigns or assesses credit doesn't even flow in our mind, right? Like, if we gave you credit and the thing was crap, there's no value in that, right? And so it's not on our radar. So if you tell us what you need for that, there's no decrees going out. Like today at the Board of Governors, what you'll notice, one sec, what you'll notice is, well, you were there at the Senate meeting. You'll notice how we made sure that the senators and the faculty knew that this cut was happening until the students did this, right? You'll notice, and they came with this much more. That wasn't about credit though, right?
Yeah.
The second part of your piece, which is, and I want to make sure I get it right, is how do we have the conflict of interest or this overwhelming of the students? Whether it's from this student fee or the tuition dollars, like 90% of what happens, or I think 70% of what a university does comes from student dollars. So nothing's changed in that sense from my perspective. You might have.
so I would answer both questions a little bit differently. Number one, in terms of the recognition of the projects that would be funded through that other fund, one of the perks that we've asked for, it's one of our quote unquote demands, is a full-time communications person to develop a communication strategy. Because one of the things that we've noticed is, I know this is an open session, so I'm not meaning to throw anybody under a bus, but the university isn't particularly great at recognizing and telling student stories. And we want somebody with that intent focus. So that person would be tasked with making sure that the recognition of the student donation and the student decisions and all things student experience are being told and told properly. There's lots of different examples over the years of the Students' Union, the Graduate Students Association, and students at large in general, not necessarily getting the credit that they deserve for the work that they're doing. And so we want very much for the student affairs professional to be our spokesperson. From an accountability standpoint, I don't think it's necessarily a conflict of interest, but I think it's an accountability piece. If you look at your peer associations, every university, especially in Ontario, pays some version of this fee. And the student leadership is usually cut out of those conversations. And David McMurray, through his couple of decades of leadership, was really keen on making sure that the students were partners at the table. And Ivan is continuing that work. And so while he still reports to the president of the university, the board of governors, and the Senate, at the same time, we're in the rooms. On the second page of the brief, we kind of point out that the president is part of the student affairs leadership team. The executive director is part of the student affairs executive group. The president is an ex officio member of that group, so they need to be called in. And the student affairs advisory council, which oversees the agreement, still exists and still meets. So there's lots of counterpoints to make sure that student voices are being heard and being communicated to the executive leadership team that reports up to Deb. Dr. McClatchy, sorry.
Just looking at the time. Yeah, we're gonna get a motion. You want the motion? Okay, so got a motion on the table. That the board of directors adopt the recommendation presented. Motion by Director Rashid and seconded by Director Bockinger. Would you like to speak to your motions?
Thank you for this conversation.
Thanks, folks.
Any discussion on the matter? As I see none, move the voting. All those in favor? All those opposed? And any abstentions? Okay, as I see none, the motion passes with unanimous consent. Thank you, Dr. Joseph. I provided lots of insight for us in this discussion.
Thank you
Thank you
kindly.
very much.
Man, I hope you go on to the Supreme Court. This is the best run meeting ever. You guys fool around here. All kidding aside, thank you for your generosity. I can guarantee you that I work for you, so you'll see that in the years to come.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Have a good night. Okay, so moving onwards to the consent agenda. In terms of the BMD reports, I wasn't sure who was supposed to complete those. Phil, was I supposed to complete those?
Board management delegations, that's you.
Okay, so those weren't completed for this week, but what I can promise is for the next meeting, I can give the chair all of those board managed delegations consent agenda items. And I assume they can be approved at the next meeting. Is that possible?
Because today is the last meeting, right?
Yeah, today's the last meeting of this board, so it does get a little bit weird. I would kind of point to the good doctor. You still with us, Ian?
Yeah, sorry, couldn't find the unmute button. I mean, I think they still could be completed and just submitted via email. So they're at least completed, and then we can make sure they're on the agenda for the first meeting in May, and they could be formally approved at that time.
Okay, cool. So I saw the ends policy was submitted, so can I have a motion on the table that the board of directors adopt the ends policy consent agenda for this meeting? Motion by Vice Chair Phillips and seconded by Director Corey. Would you like to speak to your motions? Any discussion on the matter? As I see none, moving to voting. All those in favor? All those opposed? And any abstentions? Okay, as I see none, the motion passes with unanimous consent. Moving onwards to comments from the chair of the board and CGO. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the last board meeting of our term. I don't really have any updates to give you guys tonight, but yeah, thank you all for a great term and for a great year. It's a pleasure being your chair. Moving onwards to comments from the president's CEO.
Hi, everybody. Pardon my tardiness. I've just got a few updates for everybody today. Right now, we've ironed out what the transition expectations are for my team right now. So in terms of transition reports, we figured out exactly what we're expecting from my team. And my big thing for me is I want like physical copies for the incoming team to be able to actually hold in their hands and read. So those expectations have been outlined, as well as figuring out what exit interviews look like. Right now, we're wrapping up on something I've called the Triangle Project, which is a project that kind of aims to tangibly outline how to handle student engagement with the students union in an intentional manner that kind of focuses on like the fun and enjoyability piece, the experiential opportunity piece, and learning and development piece. So I'm really excited to wrap that up. Obviously, I don't think I need to hit on the point of SAAA coming to the fore. That just happened. Congratulations. We've completed hires for both the kitchen manager and the office administrator positions. And then on Monday, the Students' Union won the Earl Shelley Unsung Hero Award at the Athletic Banquet. So
Cool.
that's the press. And that's everything.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions for the president? Director Corey?
I just wanted to check about GSR Brantford. Is that all good? That's all done?
I don't believe that's finished yet. I think we're still working on interviews for that.
Cool.
Okay, Director Burushian?
I just wanted to send a shout out to the president for the successful Laurier Helps, is that what it's called? Event that happened in Brantford with students, I think from GSR going to donate to those in need in the Brantford community. Despite it being rainy and gross, I think it was a
Don't even get me started.
what?
So
Don't even get me started. That was brutal. The rain sucked.
But I feel like it was a great effort, and I hope that initiative will be expanded going into next year, especially knowing how much need there is in the downtown. So just want to say thank you.
Yeah, that was something that Kayla felt particularly passionate about. So I'm really happy she got to see that through the way that her vision came to life on that one.
Okay, thank you. Are there any further questions for the president? Yeah, I don't see any hands. So we'll move onwards to comments from the executive director and COO.
Yeah, I don't have a ton to kind of update. A major part of what we've been working on, we just passed again. So thank the board for passing and sign that. By the way, you're signing on that agreement. So when it's ready for signing, you're not planning on going away before the end of the exam, right? Okay, perfect. Yeah, so that's a great relief to kind of get that off our shoulders, and we look forward to kind of working through the agreement and fixing it where it needs fixed and tightening it up where it needs tightening. So looking forward to actually working with that. I found that working with Dr. Joseph throughout this process has been pretty rewarding. He's a really strong advocate for students and the student experience on both our campuses, soon to be all three of our campuses. Can of worms in particular want to open up today, but yeah, we're looking forward to kind of seeing how that we can kind of execute the vision of student affairs without negatively impacting the student experience. I do want to thank the board for another strong year and look forward to working with Mohammed and his board next year and continuing that work.
Okay, perfect.
Congratulations on getting here. Good luck on exams. Go Jays, go. And very apropos, go Raptors.
All right, any questions for the executive director? Director Burushian?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, like, sincerely, evidently, congratulations on the fantastic work that your team has done in writing up the SAAA. Hopefully, we will not have too many issues next year, and that we will have some sort of active oversight when it comes to allocating money to those projects. In the previous discussion, I kind of was alluding to credit, not, you know, how like usually sometimes there's, that's what I was really kind of hinting at. I wasn't talking about like, you know, the other stuff as we had discussed. I'm really excited about that. And thank you for being the strong advocate that on that negotiating table. I know it wasn't easy, so I appreciate it from you. Cheers.
All right, thank you. Any further questions or comments? Okay, I see none, so we'll move onwards to the ownership linkage committee report. So I think we did a really good job this term with some ownership linkage events. We pulled up our bootstraps from last term in terms of getting more events out there and getting the name of the students out there. We held some events on Brantford and on Waterloo in order to educate students on what we do, who we are, and I believe it worked because at every single event we answered questions to students who want to know about what we did. We answered questions about confusions about the board, questions about finance, questions about how our meetings are run, things like that. I feel like all of our ownership linkage events were done very well. And in terms of socials that we did with the board, I think that those also went very well. So, yeah, looking forward to next year's ownership linkage events, see if they are still awesome like they were this year.
No pressure.
Are there any questions or comments or?
What are the recommendations for next year, in order to, improve, the amount of the amount of events, but like the actual events themselves?
Yeah, so one thing that I wish I did a little bit better this year in terms of ownership linkage is having more consistent events that cost a little to no money, such as a booth or something like that outside the concourse. I think that those kinds of events are really good to get directors involved and to answer direct questions about what the board does. So I think having smaller, more consistent and cheaper events like that could go a long way. We don't need to spend hundreds of dollars on events. We could still do that, but those small events do go a very long way. So I think having those would be very beneficial. Director Murphy.
I'd also suggest trying to get involved in both the fall and spring open houses. Because a lot of students, there's a lot of foot traffic, and a lot of students walking around. I believe the Students' Union always has a little setup there. And just working those open house days, I know a lot of potential students are there, especially in the spring one, because it's usually students who have already accepted.
That's a fantastic idea. Is he right now?
Yeah, absolutely,
Yeah,
yeah.
no, these are fantastic ideas. I think that, especially like for next year, I will try my best to kind of make sure that we have some sort of presence, well, bigger presence, I guess, on campus. As for Waterloo, I think that the approach that we'll be taking next year is to actually have kind of like a booth with donuts. I think that is kind of cool. But I feel like we should also do like in the fall and the winter kind of go, not co-opt, but participate in some of the programming that kind of exists on the Brentford and the Waterloo campus, where we can kind of offer students, hey, come have some food and enjoy whatever event and get to meet support directors. I think that will be really crucial. I think the last thing I would add would be during the election cycle to kind of have like meet the board type event, and then like again bringing them to like a nice to Wilt's dinner, where we could kind of speak to students at the end of the fall term, like here's what the board of directors is like, here's why you should be interested, and here's why you should care, and have dinner with us, type of thing. I think that'd be kind of cool. But yeah, that's comments.
Yeah, absolutely. I think another point of advice I can give you is when you are scheduling like meeting sessions or something like that, make sure that you reach out as early as possible to as many directors as you can. Because some directors will flake on the day of, unfortunately. But if you have enough directors there, let's say you get about 5 or 6 to show up, the vast majority will show up.
Yeah.
So if you reach out as early as possible, people will show up to it.
Yeah, I think that will be one of the biggest priorities during the winter semester. Making sure that we have strong board director elects on that committee that are willing to take some leadership in planning events. I think that will be really part of the process.
Yeah, absolutely. Do we have any further questions or comments? Okay, as I see none, we can move onwards to some finance discussions. So, Bill.
There's actually the operating procedures agreement extension request first.
What's that?
So the SAAA governs how we kind of operate with student affairs and with the comprehensive student services fee. The operating procedures agreement is basically the rules of the sandbox with the university. So how we deal with ICT special constables. Can't remember what SHRM is, but the risk management folks. Facilities is a huge part of the agreement, and that's actually a big part of the reason why the agreement's not done yet. Because we have a financial kind of arrangement with them of how everything's done in terms of paying the bills for both of our facilities in Waterloo and Brantford. Basically, it's the rules of engagement. And so that agreement was supposed to be done by the end of this year. The SAAA took much longer than anybody anticipated, so we're just asking for another year extension. The agreement is not an egregious one, doesn't cost students any money. It just tells us how we're allowed to engage with them and how they're allowed to engage with us. By the end of the university.
There will be negotiations throughout next year and we'll hopefully have a new agreement signed by the end of next year. Is that correct?
Well, yes, your name will be on that agreement.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
I know that's not what you're saying.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, like, we're gonna get
So if everything goes according to plan, it'll be you, me, and Megan Spindler signing on that agreement. So yeah, no, I'm not trying to. That's the time frame that exists. We want to get that done. A lot of the agreement, like a good 80+% of it, is low hanging fruit and will be easy to knock off. There's a few things that needed to be added in. So for example, the relationship that we have with special constables in the current agreement is 2 paragraphs long.
That's it.
That's it. It's always been a really great working relationship, but it's become a lot more complicated with kind of security and the risk management assessments and things of that nature. So it's going to be my recommendation that we take that out, turn it into an appendix, and make it a service level agreement that we can kind of constantly review and renegotiate as we see fit. Because the relationship with that department has changed pretty dramatically over the last couple of years. Their size of their unit has grown exponentially. The way they function, the fact that I think they unionized a couple of years back. So it's a very different environment than when we originally signed back in 2018.
And it's a much bigger unit in Brantford now.
Correct.
Okay, so before we approve the extension of this agreement, are there any further questions or comments? What does matter? Okay, so can I have a motion on the table that the board approve the extension of this agreement by 1 year? Motion by Director Boninger, and seconded by Director Murphy. Would you like to speak to your motions? Any discussion on the matter? As I see none, we'll move into voting. All those in favor? All those opposed? And any abstentions? Okay, as I see none, the motion passes with unanimous consent. Moving onwards to, which one are we doing first?
Governance.
Okay, so governance budget. So I assume everyone has read the governance budget. But I want to turn the floor over to Chris Turner to give an explanation of the budget itself, because I think he's the best authority here on that.
So, before I go into a big kind of explanation on the overall budget, for the governance budget and the elections budget, there's 2 separate motions. You guys have to approve the governance budget separately. Once that's done, those 2 budgets are actually built into the larger budget that comes next for your approval. So that's why we start with these and then move on to the larger budget, because if you don't approve these, then you can't approve the larger budget. So I don't know, Phil, is there anything specifically in these 2 budgets that you wanted to point out?
No, one of the things that's in there is the governance coordinator position. The honorarium has been removed as per the board's instructions from last year. We did take some of your comments into account in terms of the donut principle, we'll call it, for the Laurier votes, which will be part of the elections budget, as you'll notice. Other than that, it's a pretty straightforward budget.
Are there any questions for the Director of Finance?
Well, yeah, I have a couple of questions. With me being in Brantford next year and ideally bringing the board as one physically in person, whether it be in Brantford or in Waterloo, are we expecting that the travel budget to be sufficient for that?
$450.
So that's typical based on the actuals that we've experienced over the years. Obviously with COVID, things got a little bit weird and off the rails. And we can always make a budget adjustment as needed. One of the things that we did in the before times was it was mandated that during the school year, so once during the fall term and once during the winter term, that the board did a full meeting present on each other's campus. It obviously changed a little bit with COVID going remote. But this type of thing is relatively new over the last 3 years. So if we find that it's not enough coverage for budget, we can always apply for a budget amendment. That's not a huge expense. It's like
Okay.
less than 0.5% of the overall operating budget. So
Right.
I wouldn't worry about it.
So that's question number one. Question number two, snacks and refreshment at board meetings. We haven't had any this year. I don't think at all. Is $1,500 going to be enough next year with, like it hasn't been increased since 2020, 2021. Inflation is a thing.
So my answer to your question is gonna be the exact same as the answer to the question before.
Okay.
We believe it to be enough. You're not here to feed an army, you're here to feed volunteers, so, and we have
Of course.
different philosophies over the years of what that looks like, so coffee, tea, water.
Cookies.
Cookies, I was harsh.
Yes, absolutely, cookies.
Fresh fruit. Owen Burry, who was the chair. I don't remember when, the years kind of blur together anyway, for Zamar's year as president, he didn't want the cookies and stuff, so he switched to pizza, so he would order pizza. It should be more than enough, and part of the attraction is that it was mandatory to be in person.
Yes,
Meeting, right? So now that we're in hybrid, it's kind of hard to figure out what that budget looks like.
that
Well,
would be,
that's the expectation that is for next year's board, then we can definitely, if we need to make an adjustment to the budget, we can do.
absolutely, and that's the kind of the approach that I will be taking next year, and I've already communicated that with the director-elect, is that it'll be mandatory in person with remote approved as needed.
And well ahead of time.
And well ahead of time. So, like, obviously, like fruits, veggies, healthy stuff, and then dinner every once in a while is kind of what I'm planning, especially for like big meetings. I took this from a previous discussion with the chair, that like when we're gonna have big meetings and we want absolutely like the most amount, like have enough money to, it's a 2-hour meeting dinner.
Like, unless you're planning on doing something extravagant.
No, Wills is
I think it'll be
fine.
fine. I think we can
Wills
figure
is
it out.
perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's it for me.
Okay, we'll move on to Director Corey.
Yeah, I just kind of tacking on to the end of that conversation. I think 1,500 should be fine. I had one question just about the Zoom Pro license. I noticed it went up by $26. Is that just Zoom increasing their prices, or?
I'm gonna pass that to Director Mueller.
Yeah, the previous budget amount was actually the US dollar amount, so that's corrected to reflect Canadian dollars.
Oh, awesome.
I'll be right back. One moment.
Do we have to?
Yeah.
Motion?
I don't think we can now because we're.
You've also lost quorum. Are there any other questions since we've got?
Sorry.
That fast.
I just need to go break my fast.
Oh,
But for a quick drink. No, I just need to go drink like a sip of water, that's all.
Okay, so are there any other questions? Vice Chair Phillips.
Yeah, I think the budget looks good, and that if there aren't any other questions, I would motion that the board of directors approve the governance budget for the 2023-24 school year.
Okay, so motion by Vice Chair Phillips and seconded by Director Bottinger. Would you like to speak to your motions? Any discussion on the matter? That's none. We'll move into voting. All those in favor? All those opposed? And any abstentions? Okay, so the motion passes with unanimous consent. We can move onwards to the operations budget. Yes.
elections budget.
The elections budget.
Okay, so the elections budget.
I don't think it's in the package.
It
Yes,
is.
it should.
Oh,
I
where?
have it.
It's directly underneath the
Page
governance.
31.
There it is.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, right
yeah,
here, right
yeah.
here, that's-
Sorry,
that's
sorry,
like-
that's on.
Yeah.
Okay, so, Chris, is there anything you'd like to speak on about
I
this?
don't think so. It's quite similar to previous years, as you can see by the documentation. Ian, I don't know if there's anything you particularly put into this. I know we've bumped up the election reimbursement amount a little bit. But other than that, it's pretty status quo from previous years.
Yeah, just some general bump ups. We were under budget this year. Obviously, this was the first year back to fully in person. So just trying to anticipate there's still room within the budget that we had to kind of take on some different initiatives if need be. So for example, one of the recommendations from current governance coordinator Ava was some signs, some vote here signs, that type of thing. So there's some things in her transition report that will kind of serve a good basis for next year. Otherwise, it's all pretty standard stuff.
Okay, well, Phil, did you have any comments?
Yeah, I was just gonna point out that the CRO stuff has been pulled out of the budget because the governance coordinator fills that, but the DRO, which is the deputy returning officer, is in there because the hope is that the governance coordinator will be able to hire a deputy returning officer, so that there's consistent representation for elections on both campuses.
Okay, Director of Leadership.
So there are a couple of things that I wanted to ask. One, would we be able to just like take the surplus from the elections budget this year and then add it to next year's budget? Money has already been.
It doesn't quite roll over in that way, but when we get the audited financial statements and there is a surplus, we can make a recommendation to you. Yep.
Because, yeah, and then, so I saw there was an increase in the food incentive in Waterloo, but not in Brantford, so I was like, well, that's just a question I have to ask. There also hasn't been any increase in the ballot counting food for scrutineers and appeals committee in 4 years. Is that normal? Just,
I have not actually ever been in that room, so I can't speak to it. I assume that speaks more to the volume of people in that room than it does the food. But the good doctor seems to have something.
Yeah, so basically we still have in our policies the ability to have scrutineers. However, there really isn't anything to scrutinize because we're not physically counting ballots. That's kind of a remnant of a, in-person physical ballot. You want to make sure people aren't stuffing ballots into their pockets or whatever. Given that we use an electronic system, it's, we're taking the results, and so people still have the ability to watch the results from the computer system transferred onto the page, which then is read. Historically, no one has indicated a willingness or has indicated any interest in doing that. So that's why it hasn't changed, because it hasn't been taken advantage of. So that's one where theoretically you could slide some of that funding over to enhance some of the food incentives. Well, there's flexibility, even though it's laid out the way it is. There's obviously operational flexibility when we're in the election period and we're trying to make decisions.
absolutely.
And then what I would suggest is when you and governance coordinator to be named later, and whoever's part of that election staff, like you're basically looking at the $1,000 for food, and it can be divided up however it's
Right.
needed, right?
Okay, cool. Yeah, because like, I just want to make sure that.
Yeah.
Also on the Brantford campus, we apparently students this year didn't have the option to like have a computer and vote when they went to the table. Was that a thing here in Waterloo?
So I can speak to that. So basically, this was our first year running an in-person election after Lori had implemented single sign-on. So we actually ran into a problem where we couldn't have a laptop present for people to log in to vote because of the single sign-on requirements and the authentication and all of the mechanics involved in that. So we attempted and then quickly realized that we weren't able to do that. However, the QR code, having people complete it on their mobile device and then show completion on their mobile device, ended up being one way faster because people could, 8 people could stand around and do it at the same time and then get their incentive. So it was actually, it's more the reality of that with the enhanced security requirements of the university, having a laptop for people to vote on is not possible anymore, but the QR code matched with the prevalence of mobile phones was a great alternative that we kind of stumbled into.
Cool, thank you.
Okay, Director Corey.
I'll just quickly do 2 things here. Actually, we'll ignore the first question. I'll throw a motion out there to accept the elections proposal into the budget. I
Okay.
just realized I did bad math in my head.
So a motion by Director Corey, seconded by Director Burchett. Would you like to speak to your motions? Any discussion on the matter? As I see none, we'll move to the voting. All those in favor? All those opposed? And any abstentions? Okay, so that's another motion passes with unanimous consent. Moving onwards to the Senate vacancies. Now, I have received.
Wait,
No.
operating budget.
We have to do the operating.
Operating budget.
The big one.
Yeah. 5 year.
Operating budget, okay, so. What's the operating budget? Chris, is there anything you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, there's a fair bit for this one. So these 2 individual budgets that you just approved, these are 2 of about between 55 and 60 different departmental budgets that we have with this level of detail across both Waterloo and Brantford campuses. So this level of detail goes into the whole organization. Obviously, we're not going to bring 60 individual departmental budgets to the board for your approval because you see how long you guys debated over $100 here and on a $12 million budget, we would be here forever. So the information, while there are 55 to 60 different individual departments, it's aggregated in what's brought to you tonight. So how it works is each individual department has a budget manager who's responsible for preparing that budget. That budget manager then provides that information either to myself or in this current year, Liam Chapin, who's the VP of Finance and Volunteer Operations. And Liam and I work to aggregate and collate all the data together to get it into this format so that we have an overall budget for the whole organization. So there's a lot of back and forth on these individual budgets, adding accounts, taking out accounts, putting in increases, putting in decreases. How much did we spend? The challenge in this year and last year was, it was a little bit hard to compare the last couple of years because it was COVID years. Now we're out of COVID and back to normal operations. So you'll notice there are some increases built into the budget because of that, but it's a pretty slick process overall. I'm happy to announce that again, we've able to provide and bring forth a balanced budget to the board tonight, which as a not-for-profit, one of your goals is obviously to get as close to a balanced budget as you can for submission. So the responsibility of the board tonight is to take a look at this aggregated data, make sure we've got everything that makes sense, make sure you don't see anything at that high level that's missing. I will talk to some of the assumptions that we made into building this budget. So our main sources of revenue that I think all of you are aware are one of the big ones is student fees, and that's obviously driven by registration. So we do not know what the registration is going to be yet for this fall. So we have to make assumptions on that. And we tend to be very conservative in our assumptions around registration because we'd rather be lower than what the actual number is and have a additional revenue that we need to deal with than the other way around. Same with health and dental. The number of people that have enrolled in our health and dental plan has gone up significantly in the last year. but we don't know that that's going to continue. So we've backed off a little bit, assuming it's going to go back closer to some more traditional numbers so that we're not caught off guard if that doesn't happen. So there's a lot of conservative assumptions around building this. There's been some CPI, as everyone knows, we're in a period of high inflation. So there's some cost of living adjustments that were fairly significant this year that went into it. The other big one where we kind of missed the boat last year with last year's budget is with Wilfs. We thought it would, at the time of building the budget, we thought it would take off a lot quicker than what it actually did. We only had 6 returning staff from a student perspective when we opened the restaurant in the fall. So we had to put the brakes on. We had to have very reduced hours for the first few months. So we overshot our projection on both revenue and expense for hospitality. So we've dialed that back this year. I'm happy to report that we have, I think, 74 or 75 students committed to returning next year to Wilfs. So it won't be like opening a brand new restaurant in the fall again, and we'll be able to be a little bit more efficient and productive right from the get-go. So that's good. So those are kind of the assumptions that go into this budget. And as I said earlier, in these overall numbers, elections and the governance budget are included. So the materials that you have in your package, I've tried to present the data in a few different ways. So you'll see that the budget is summarized in one document by revenue and expense category. So you would have all the traditional types of revenue that a student union or a student organization would have, and all the traditional types of expenses that it would have. The second way that the data is submitted is by department. So you'll see it presented by governance, by finance and volunteer operations, by clubs and associations. So how our structure works, and that there's a VP for each one of those different overall departments. So we've submitted it that way. And then the other way is a pie graph that shows both the revenues and expenses by the 4 ends of the organization. The last document, which also needs to be part of this package, is that we're required to provide to you a list of expected expenses that will incur over the year that are kind of at a one-time or a limited exposure where there's dollar amounts greater than $10,000. So there's a list in here of about 20 or 25 different items that would fall under that category. So for the numbers themselves, we will anticipate generating revenues of a little over $12 million next year, so $12.187 million. Overall expenses will be about the same, and we're producing a balanced budget for submission to you. Again, the big sources of our revenue: the health and dental plan, student fees, hospitality, and what I would call other. So things like we rent out the food court to Aramark and they pay us money for that space. We rent out lockers, commissions we get on ticket sales, that sort of thing, interest income that we earn from money sitting in our bank. So total revenues are 12.1 million, same with expenses. On the expense side, we've really committed this year, now that we're back in person, we've bumped up the programming budget on both the Waterloo and Brantford campuses. So we're spending more on our programming. We've increased the budget money that we're giving to the clubs and associations, kind of their seed money to get them going every year. That one's gone up quite substantially in the tune of $30,000 or $40,000. Because we have more clubs than we've ever had before, but also so that we can give each one of those clubs a little bit more money to get going. The clothing, week, we're bumping up the programming and the swag and the food and everything associated with week. So trying to put more money back into activities now that we're fully back and committed to in-person on-campus activities. I'll leave it at that at this point, and open it up for questions from the board.
Director Boucher.
So I just want to first start off by saying thank you for this really detailed and balanced budget. I do have a couple questions. I have poured over it just as maybe not to the same degree as you have, but I have
Yeah.
looked at it in great detail, and there are a couple of things that kind of I have questions about.
Sure.
The first one and the most important one to me is the staff wages and benefits. We anticipate a 4% decrease in staff wages and benefits for full-time and part-time.
Yeah.
Why?
So that is solely because what I mentioned earlier, how we had overshot our budget from the Wilf's perspective. So we hire between, I think, around 150 students over the course of a pre-COVID normal year when we were bringing in $3 million in revenue. We're not going to hit that this year. So we've pulled back on the number of hours that we need to pay part-time students in Wilf's, just because the restaurant's not going to be open like it used to be.
Yeah, and one of the things that Wills was doing in the before times was 7 days a week, 12+ hours a day.
Right.
And we've never been able to achieve that in this past year or this current year, I guess. We have opened up 6 days a week, which was a pretty big win for our staff team. So that kind of the fact that we're not open as much is a big part of it.
Yeah.
Right.
So for the rest of the staff, there have been some inflationary adjustments or increases. We've added an extra, I don't know if you're aware, we've added an extra AVP position for next year to help with clubs because of how much clubs has grown, that it's just a huge amount of workload. So we've added an AVP positions. Then we've added, how many marketing?
So we haven't added them yet, but it's gonna be 4 positions.
Yeah, so we've built in 4 student marketing positions into this budget. So there have been some overall increases, but the result of that Wilf's makes it look like, yeah.
Like the part that, like, for me, when I was mostly surprised is that, like, I just want to make sure that the our employees, our core employees, if you think about it, are getting fair cost of living increases. That's probably like the biggest thing that I care about in terms of, you know, the organization.
We also have to account for the minimum wage increase that's coming in October, I think
Yeah,
it was. So,
it's going up another $1 and change, so that's in there as well. And if things go well with Wilf's this year and we can add more hours, that situation probably won't repeat itself when we're at the year from now, when we're looking at next year's.
Perfect. Because like that, I just really want to make sure that like our employees are getting cost of living increases. It's not fair for them to get wage cuts because of that. The second thing that kind of worried me in terms of costs is bank charges. We're expecting a 9% increases in bank charges. Have we maybe looked at different providers for that? Like,
no, actually, you know what drives that mostly is that we've gone, it's more from activity, not so much the bank increasing their rates. So an example is for reimbursement of student expenses when they submit, and most of you have probably done that, submit some expense reimbursements. It's all through EFT now. We used to write checks. So the actual cost every time we generate an electronic funds transfer payment and it's processed through the bank, there's a charge to that. So that in itself, because the number of EFTs has gone. So just to give you guys a sense, our clubs person is in the process of, just in the last few weeks, she's got over 700 students who have submitted reimbursements for club activity. So an EFT is the way to go. It reduces, checks not cashed and fraud potential. So, but that's almost exclusively what that is.
Like, I understand that, but like, there must be other providers in the community that could provide us the same service for less.
It's certainly something that we can look into. It's a relatively new thing for businesses to be able to use that as a payment function back to, in our case, students. It's something that we have been working with RBC and developed with them. I want to say 3 or 4 years ago. And so it's definitely something that we can kind of go back and renegotiate.
Please.
We may not be able to. It's hard to say what they're going to say, but it's certainly a conversation that we can have based on the volume that we're getting and the volume of business that we do.
Right, because like, it's a lot of money, and like, if we could be saving money by going to a different provider, I think that should be explored. The last thing that I wanted to ask was in actually terms of income. Our interest income has increased significantly, which I'm very happy about. With the current macroeconomic outlook rates being steady, for potentially the next year, is there a way that we can maximize that? But we have a significant amount of cash and, we have our financial policy, but is there a way to capitalize on these high interest rates to generate income?
Yeah, for sure. So that is, that just generating an extra $90,000 in interest income is huge for this organization.
Absolutely.
So we do, I think I've told this board that we have, we took a laddered approach to investing in GICs, and we'll continue to do that over the next year. So I think the first one is maturing in the next couple of months. So we'll look at interest rates at that time, reinvest that money if we don't need it. The only thing that would prevent us from increasing that any more is that if some of the reserves that we have set aside, we do decide at some point during the year that we need to use them for what they're originally intended for. So an example, we've got over $1 million sitting in the bank and a combination of GICs for some sort of dining facility, restaurant, whatever on the Brantford campus. If we then decide at some point during the year to actually go ahead and start spending that money, then obviously our interest income will go down because we're using that money for what it's intended for. But we don't have concrete plans for that yet, but that's definitely on the radar.
Absolutely. Obviously, like, as a big organization, we have access to like buying treasury bills. We have access to buying flexible GICs.
Yeah.
We have flexible GIC right now could give you like 4+%.
Mhm.
No kidding. That's good money.
Yeah.
So if I recall correctly, that is, the last part, for the clubs and associations, I saw a $40,000 increase in the budget for that.
Yeah.
What's the ratio Brantford Waterloo?
Actual clubs, would you know, Shane?
Roughly 200 and I'd say 275 to like 30th in terms of the ratio of Waterloo clubs to Brantford clubs.
No, I mean like the funding increase, like what's the?
So it'll be equal across.
Cool.
Like if so it's not 20,000 goes to Brantford and 20,000 goes, every club will get the same increase, whether it's at Brantford or Waterloo.
At the start of every term, every club will request a budget.
Yeah.
We updated it.
Yeah.
Because like there are some really cool cheese club.
Yeah.
Need I say more? It's or mock trial. There's a bunch of really cool clubs that are popping up on Brantford that
Are you on the cheese club or in the cheese club?
I am a GV. No, not even a GV. I'm a member.
So where do you sit on craft slice, like the cheese slices? The craft ones?
Crap.
Are those? Can you buy those?
Craft single?
Cheap or not cheap? Okay, so it's plastic. With all due respect,
It's technically not cheap.
I grew up with it's processed milk products. I grew up with my grandma making cheese from yogurt. I can't eat plastic. It just
Hate to break it to you, you eat plastic. But anyway,
it's terrible. I don't want to eat plastic.
All right, let's move onwards to Director Corey.
There's the mute button. I'm gonna let Director or Vice Chair Phillips go first because he's been waiting.
Okay, Vice Chair Phillips.
Thank you. I don't have anything too exciting to add. Just thank you for preparing this thorough budgeting report. Looks good. I'm happy to see the students union continue to move out of COVID in a positive direction. And so I'd like to motion that the Board of Directors approve the 2023-24 operations budget.
So let's hold that motion for a second. Let Director Corey ask a question.
So there's still opportunity, once a motion has been passed, like and seconded, like there's a discussion period, like technically that's.
Right.
Should be happening, so.
Okay, so yep, so motion by Vice Chair Phillips, second by Director Boucher. Would you like to speak to your motions? Any discussion on the matter? We'll go to Director Corey.
Yeah, I just had two quick ones. I saw on the over 10K list that there was something going in for the clubs and association website. Is that just kind of paying off the website, which I'm assuming is Presence?
Yeah, so it's a subscription model where we have to pay an annual subscription fee, so that just reflects what that is.
Okay. And then the new AVP clubs you were saying, what exactly is that?
So one of the things that Shane and I have done over the past, let's call it 5 or 6 months, is do a quick high-level SWOT analysis of each department, working with the directors and the VPs that work in those departments. One of the things that is very evident, or was very evident very quickly, was that the workload inside the clubs and associations portfolio was so high that the VP was kind of getting bogged down in a lot of minutia and detail work. So it's really hard to kind of come up with advancements and work strategically when the VP's, approving events and approving expense requisitions, etc. So we are piloting a second AVP on the Waterloo campus to help alleviate some of that work so that the VP can actually work on forward-looking incentives. So one of the major projects, for example, this year that Haley Running wanted to do was really kind of redevelop a training manual for all clubs, presidents, etc. And she just hasn't had the bandwidth to be able to do that because of how busy clubs has been. I mean, it's a success story that it's so busy that they can't focus on stuff. So it's just recognizing that we need additional resources and are providing that for that. That's the first step in what will likely be a couple of different changes within multiple departments to help alleviate some of the pressure so that we can focus on the proper tasks at hand.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay, Director Boucher.
First off, there are 3 questions that I just remembered. The first one is the flex dollars. Is that just a Waterloo thing?
Yes, that's a mandatory meal plan part. So flex dollars is a part of the meal plan that all first-year students living in residence pay.
Right,
I believe apartments, I believe it's only dormitory
Apartment style, yes.
right. Because I know Brantford, we have the similar type of.
So your quote unquote meal plan,
plan, yeah.
is very different. You basically, you have what is called, would be on Waterloo campus called convenience dollars.
Oh, okay, cool. Thank you for explaining that to me. The second question is, I think we had discussed 2 something months ago, making the boardrooms and Waterloo or in Brantford, the telecommunications technology center.
Yeah, that's in my budget.
Oh,
Improvements. Yep.
I didn't.
It's not significantly expensive to get the
Okay.
devices that we want, which is 3 new kind of cameras and microphones set up. So it's the OWL technology. It's like $7,500.
That's not
For the 3 units all together.
And that dying TV is not gonna.
Maybe we can take a look at it. There are bigger fish to fry on the Brantford office environment. If we can get to that, yes.
Absolutely.
We'll get to that.
Do you have one more question?
No.
Okay, we'll go to Director Boninger.
So I was looking over the 10K payment report. We do have full week entertainment, and that includes programming the concert for the Waterloo campus. And I also see the 18 concert and the Sherwood concert tech.
Yep.
Are those, how does the concert kind of differ for the O week entertainment section and the 18 section?
Easiest answer is That's an 18 concert budget, so theoretically, they would be throwing concerts outside of the orientation week framework. So you could have a concert on, I'm gonna arbitrarily assign October 12th. It just gives them money to be able to go after artists, to be able to throw those events.
Okay, so preemptively, yeah.
So they're the ones that are in charge of that event during orientation week.
Yeah.
But the orientation week budget takes care of the orientation event. And the A-team stuff takes care of the Waterloo-based concert events outside of orientation week.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, are there any further comments? Okay, so I see none, we'll move to voting. All those in favor? All those opposed? And any abstentions? Okay, so I see none, the motion passed, now with consent. All right, budget.
Oh, wait, I forgot to give a shout out to the president for the success of clubs and associations. I mean, he did so well that now we have to hire a second AVP. Congratulations.
That all goes out to our VP clubs and associations. Taylor.
Absolutely.
I think I don't know how she does what she does, but she's able to keep her head down and drudge through the rather administrative side of things, and she's had to put some of those like personal initiatives she wanted to execute aside for in order to get what needs to be done. So everything goes up out to her.
The fact that we're bringing back, like students are creating these clubs and they're having all these fun events, this just speaks to the testament of your operations team success, because that's awesome. Like there are so many cool things going on now. I love it here now. Look, I like it better.
Now, you didn't like it up until now?
I'll pass along the sentiments.
Okay, let's move on to our Senate discussion. So I've received a few Senate nominations, and I believe we have an opportunity here today to acclaim one of the Senate nominations. And I was gonna go with the first one we have. Ian, I just wanted confirmation. How many can we acclaim tonight? Like how many candidates can we acclaim tonight to the Senate?
So the Laurier University Secretary Office was in contact, I believe it was either early this week or at the end of last week, and there has been a third spot on Senate opened up. So right now we have 2 student packages. So if the board's amenable, you could acclaim the 2 students who have put their names forward at this time without having to do any of the board election stuff. And then next board meeting in May, we would revisit a strategy, likely in conjunction with the University Secretary's Office, to do another call. But we have 2 packages, 2 students that are available to be acclaimed, and they are Mitchell Baldwin and Haley Richardson.
Okay.
Sorry, Haley Richards.
Yeah. Okay.
Can I motion that?
Yes, you can motion that. So kind of motion on the table to acclaim Haley Richards and Mitchell Baldwin to the Wolf and Laurier University Senate. So motion by Director Rashid, seconded by Director Bottinger. Would you like to speak to your motions? Any discussion on the matter?
Congrats
Yeah,
to the now
congrats.
acclaimed senator. Like that's cool.
Ian, just a question. When did that second one came in? Because I looked earlier today and there was only one.
It just came in shortly before the meeting. So
Okay.
if directors are interested, there's a second package now in that confidential folder in the meeting folder for today's meeting.
Okay, so we're moving to voting. All those in favor? All those opposed? And any abstentions? Okay, so that's none, the motion passes with unanimous consent. So that completes all the main stuff we have to do tonight. New business and announcements. Anything besides exams going on in your lives right now?
Oh, I don't want to talk about it.
Lauren.
Yeah.
Did you see that
Yeah.
email?
What,
Mhm.
what is that?
SFN?
It was sent to all of us about a partnership.
Oh, for like this
Yeah,
afternoon?
what was that?
I mean, sometimes we just get emails like that.
Do you know who they are?
I mean, they said greetings Laurier board.
Yeah.
I didn't even.
Wow,
know
congrats on the
that,
promotions, guys.
So.
Yeah.
Big deal.
I didn't even get it.
Well, that's because I don't believe that you are on the governance page,
No,
if I recall correctly.
they still have Nicholas on there. So.
Hey, I get to
It hasn't been updated in like months.
the nice benefit of not getting a bunch of spam emails.
So is there a way that, like, do we have to respond to this?
You do not have to respond to cold emails, no.
We got a lot of cold emails. It's just one of those that I choose to.
Cause I mean, we do this stuff anyway in-house. I believe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Laurier does a lot of the stuff anyway. How's the hiring for the governance coordinator going?
So like closed, Ian, you can probably speak to that better than I could.
Yeah, it just closed. There were 2 applicants, so Mohammed, you should be getting contacted hopefully within the next day or so, getting the ball rolling on interviews for that.
Okay, cool.
Solid. So with that being said, can I have a motion on the table to adjourn the April 12th, 2023 meeting? Motion by Director Leclerc and seconded by Director Murphy. Would you like to speak to your motions? Any discussion on the matter? And that's be none, moving to voting. All those in favor? All those opposed? And any abstentions? Okay, the motion passes with unanimous consent. Thank you for a great year, everybody.